This Honourable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terry Long, Miss Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Goldin, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers.
Madam Speaker, it is intended today to have a statement by the Minister of Justice, the member from St. Andrew North Eastern. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I will be giving a statement, but I don't know if copies have been circulated.
Read from Femur.
No.
Read from Femur. Just go over there and look from Femur.
Normally, check and see for me if I just spoke to the copies, Madam Speaker, I thought was here, but I know they should be. So I wouldn't mind if the members get a copy. Can we just you got them?
Start, no, they won't understand.
Do you mind if I start? You'll get them in momentarily. But I just spoke.
But can we even just make one copy for the minister before you start? One copy.
So could we?
Madam Clerk asked the orderly to make one copy, so at least.
No. Let me just check. I think it should be here, Madam Speaker. So if we just continue and I just check on if it is available outside. Could you?
In the spirit of the member does have the statement printed, and it is here. I beg to move that the member be allowed to proceed with his presentation.
No. Could you give a copy to the speaker and then also? No, just, yes, yes. Give it to the clerk, and then you give copies to the. Madam Speaker, the reputational damage to brand Jamaica resulting from the exceedingly high murder rate and the perceptions of insecurity in the country cannot be overstated. There is therefore a real and urgent need to treat with the scourge of crime in a decisive manner. The Prime Minister and the government are determined to curb the level of violence in the country, and in particular, to reduce the incidence of murder. Madam Speaker, the increased mandatory minimum will provide greater alignment between the sentencing regimes governing serious crimes and the public's expectations of the justice system. The possibility of the imposition of a more punitive sentence will go a long way in preserving the credibility of Jamaica's justice system in the eyes of individuals traumatized by the untimely death of their loved ones. Madam Speaker, Jamaica is not taking another step in proposing the imposition of the increased mandatory minimum sentencing threshold as other jurisdictions such as South Africa, Canada, the United Kingdom, and certain states in the United States of America that are not faced with the level of brutal criminality currently plaguing our little island of Jamaica, have established mandatory minimum prison terms ranging from a low of 15 years to a high of 30 years. Madam Speaker, the reputational damage suffered from its abnormality high rates of intentional homicides, and by extension, the impact on the country's GDP, the debilitating strain placed on the Jamaican populace from the daily loss of life by violent means, demands that the penalty imposed send a clear and unmistakable message to potential killers that murderers, when caught and convicted, will be severely punished. Madam Speaker, as little as we are, Jamaica has the highest homicide rate among 22 Latin American and Caribbean countries. Our extreme reality necessitates that the legislative framework governing mandatory minimum sentences for murder surpass the average threshold used in other jurisdictions. These legislative amendments, Madam Speaker, will aid in the fight against the country's soaring crime rate by ensuring that the applicable penalty matches the severity of the crime. Madam Speaker, in respect of the bills being tabled today, we have before the House the Offences Against a Person Amendment Bill. It proposes, Madam Speaker, as I indicated a few weeks ago, increasing the mandatory minimum sentence for imprisonment under Section 3(1)(b), which has 15 years, to 45 years. I come in. Increasing the mandatory minimum sentence to be served before eligible for parole where the offense is capital murder from 20 years to 50 years under Section 3(1)(ca), which deals with eligibility for parole. 3, increasing the mandatory minimum sentence to be served before being eligible for parole, where the sentence is imprisonment for life from 15 years to 45 years, and that is under Section 3(1)(c)(b). And finally, Madam Speaker, increasing the mandatory minimum sentence to be served before being eligible for parole, where a sentence of a term of years is given from 10 years to 35 years under Section 31CB, Roman 2. Madam Speaker, we have also looked at the Criminal Justice Administration Bill, and we will touch on that a little later. But at the moment, it proposes to amend Section 42F of the Criminal Justice Administration Act by increasing the term of years to be deemed as life imprisonment from 30 years to 50 years where the offense committed is murder. The starting point for calculating the reduction in the sentence is usually life imprisonment, and the aim of this proposed amendment is to maintain an incentive scheme for defendants to plead guilty while ensuring that the reduced sentence is not inordinately low, having regard to the various nature of the offense. It is in tandem with this very reasoning that we also propose that Section 42E3 of the Criminal Justice Administration Act be amended to stipulate that the court shall not impose a sentence that is less than a term of 30 years. Madam Speaker, I should also note that the proposed amendment to the Child Care and Protection Act, generally in line with the objective of these two bills, will follow in short order. Madam Speaker, it is the government's intention to put these bills before a joint select committee for further consideration and interrogation. At that juncture, I would also wish to invite discussions surrounding the framework established in the Criminal Justice Administration Act as it concerns the reduction of a sentence upon a guilty plea. The sentiment, Madam Speaker, has been expressed that the application of discounts has led to manifestly low sentences being given that do not reflect the nature and seriousness of the offenses. It has left victims and family members dissatisfied with the process towards justice. My personal view, Madam Speaker, is that the regime established under the Plea Negotiation and Agreements Act of 2017 is robust enough to ensure that all the relevant parties, particularly the victims of the crimes and their families, have their say in determining what justice looks like in the circumstances, whilst concurrently increasing the court's disposal rate. Madam Speaker, in the light of the foregoing, I will submit these matters for consideration to the Joint Select Committee. Madam Speaker, I may add that murders across Jamaica is a matter of great concern to every single one of us here. It is a matter that is of concern not only to Jamaicans living here, Madam Speaker, but as I go across the country and I meet with returning residents and persons who have families living overseas, they intimate that if we could get violent crime, especially murders, under control, we would not have enough space for the returning residents coming back to this country. Madam Speaker, there are hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans waiting, willing, eager to return to Jamaica. But the murder rate, the violent crime, the indiscipline and other, Madam Speaker, have caused many Jamaicans to be playing a wait and see. Madam Speaker, I appreciate that when we look at the penalties, it may not be the ultimate solution, but we hope, Madam Speaker, and this is why we're sending it to a Joint Select Committee, so that the average man across Jamaica can indicate whether these sentences are strong enough or whether we should moderate them, so that everyone can play their part in the evolution of these amendments. But more importantly, Madam Speaker, we want, with this bill, when it goes to Joint Select Committee, to send that message to persons who are contract killers, persons who are engaged in gang violence, persons who are engaged in domestic abuse, and persons who can't control themselves, that they must know that if you do inflict a killing, you could remain in jail for a long, long time. Very important, Madam Speaker, that this Parliament send that message across every nook and cranny of Jamaica, because Jamaica is tired of the murders and violent crime. And if in the Joint Select Committee and when we meet here in Parliament, we can just get Jamaicans to realize the present murder rate of 40 to 100,000 is abnormal. It's not normal. It's abnormal. And we need to do something about it. And the government is determined to use all measures, including increased penalties, community intervention, firearms law, whatever, Madam Speaker. And that is not to say that there are not those occasional cases where an enraged person gets out of control. And that is where, Madam Speaker, the question of the Plea Bargaining and Negotiations Act is of some importance. Because in those cases where there's a guilty plea, then the prosecution and the defense, bearing in mind all the circumstances, they can come outside of this act and come within the Plea Bargaining and Negotiation Act, and an appropriate sentence agreed between the defense and Crown Counsel with the sanction of the presiding judge, an appropriate sentence can be deemed. You will see, Madam Speaker, and I know this is close to the leader of the opposition heart, the Criminal Justice Amendment Act 2015. It has created some problems. And the reason why it has created some problems is that for all offenses, when a guilty plea is preferred and accepted by the court, at the very earliest opportunity, the accused person who has pleaded guilty is eligible for a reduction of sentence up to 50%. Not that they get 50%, but up to 50%. It has created many problems, colleagues, because frequently the victims, the police, the prosecution, they're not brought into the general discussion of the sentence. They can, but they're usually not. So it's after the judge imposed the sentence that everybody started to quarrel. And most sentences, Madam Speaker, under the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2015, the judge has followed the law. But the people are very upset because they are not brought into the sentencing process. And I would like, at the Joint Select Committee, for us to discuss this, leader of the opposition, because I believe that the Plea Bargain Agreement and Negotiations Act encourages a general discussion between the prosecution, the defense, to look at what is an appropriate sentence. And the 50% could be a guide. But, Madam Speaker, you have a problem. You take a man who has pleaded guilty to rape, for example. The judge may start out by saying 15 years is an appropriate sentence. But because he pleads guilty at the first opportunity, the judge may well give him 50% discount. So it immediately goes to, say, 8 years. But then he has been in custody for 2 years. So the judge reduces it to 6 years. And then when he gets a sentence for rape for 6 years, the people said, Jesus, the man commit rape and he gets 6 years and all he's going to serve is 4 years? And it's a challenge, Madam Speaker. And we need to be able to ensure that when a person gets that same exact case, that at least the victim, the police, the prosecution, that their concerns are taken, and so nobody can quarrel at the end of the day, Madam Speaker. And that is what I'm really hoping, that the Joint Select Committee, when we look at it, we can make some recommendations to the Parliament as to how we move forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister for making the statement today. It's the second time that he has addressed this issue in fairly short order, and he has actually, I believe, intends to table these two bills today and to have them referred to a joint select committee. And I certainly feel that this is a matter that should go to a joint select committee because it has wide and deep implications for the justice system and the society. And I think that if this was to be rushed, you know, we may make some bad decisions that we subsequently regret. The Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act of 2015 sought to codify and modify the practice that had arisen at common law of giving persons who plead guilty a discount on sentence. That jurisdiction didn't emerge from statute originally. It was something that emerged over centuries in the way in which judges handled criminal matters coming before them. But because of the situation facing the criminal courts in Jamaica, with a very high level of backlog, we wanted to encourage persons who were guilty to plead guilty, have those matters disposed with quickly, get them out of the court system, avoid traumatizing victims of crime who may have to give evidence if a matter goes to trial and attend court for trial dates which sometimes don't get off the ground, witnesses who are also sometimes inconvenienced by that, but also are vulnerable in the context of Jamaican society and the way in which the criminal elements in our society function, so that you have a hard time often successfully prosecuting the most dangerous offenders because of the way in which they and their cronies operate. I would argue two things. First of all, it has not been generally said, certainly by the judiciary or by the practitioners that I have interfaced with, that that guilty plea regime has not been successful. To the contrary, it has led to significant reductions in backlog. It has enabled many, many cases to be disposed of on a timely basis. And the discretion that is given to the judge in the level of discount to be applied is a matter where I think the judiciary ought to pay some additional attention. Because, for example, if on the first court date the accused person pleads guilty, the jurisdiction is given, the discretion is given to the judge to apply a discount of up to 50%. Not necessarily 50%. And the statute sets out the criteria to be considered by the judge in some detail in deciding what discount to give. And that model wasn't, in fact, developed initially here. We borrowed that model from another Commonwealth jurisdiction, which is regarded highly for its criminal justice framework, which is New Zealand. So, while I understand the sentiments that the Minister has expressed, I actually feel that that system has worked very well to now. That's not to say it's perfect, it isn't, and that's not to say it can't be improved, it can. You know, we've had the benefit of 8 years of experience with it, but it has significantly contributed to the backlog reduction in the criminal courts, especially in more serious offenses. Now, on the subject of backlog, Madam Speaker, I have grave concerns with the current trend to impose mandatory minimum sentences in all serious gun offenses under Part 2 of the new Firearms Act, which, after the chaos around a recent case and the application of different parts of the Act to possession of an illegal weapon, an illegal firearm, that I believe, is going to be resolved in a way that indicates that anybody who has a firearm which is not a licensed firearm and has not been licensed to carry that firearm and is found in possession will be charged for possession of a prohibited weapon under Section 5. And that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years and a maximum sentence of 25 years. And all other firearms offenses around that, including possession with intent to injure and all of those things, carry very high levels of mandatory minimum sentences. That means the gun court is going to be faced with a situation in which, unless the plea bargaining system can become very actively used, which it has not so far, we're going to have a much higher percentage of cases going to trial than are disposed of through guilty pleas and so on. Because the inducement to plead guilty will not be there when you're staring at a mandatory minimum sentence, which is a significant period of time. So what this will do to our already overburdened court system, I fear to think. Then there is a whole matter of the correctional system, and where you're going to be imposing these heavy sentences, you're going to have people being sentenced for long periods of time. So you're going to have a big flow of, if there are successful prosecutions, they're going to have a big flow of people going into the correctional system, the prison system, and not coming out for long periods of time. Now, how the system is going to cope with that? It can't. It won't. It is already overburdened. And our 2 maximum security prisons are really not fit for purpose. They've been criticized by the UN Human Rights Committee, and they are themselves presently housing a significantly higher number of persons than they're supposed to, than they're configured to hold. And of course, past efforts to try and raise funding to build a new prison based on modern rehabilitation principles were scuppered for political expediency, and nothing has happened since. Now we have the suggestion of mandatory minimum sentences for murder, and as I understand it, though it's not terribly clear from the statement, that we're looking at for non-capital murder, which means murder that doesn't occur in circumstances where the death penalty could be imposed because it's particularly egregious, either because it's a multiple killing or it's a killing of a judicial officer or a killing in the course of a robbery. There are certain categories of murder which are capital murder and could attract theoretically, though not in practice, the death penalty. All other murders we call non-capital murder. And I understand that that is now going to carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 45 years for the non-capital murder. Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the member be allowed to wrap up now and to conclude his presentation. May it please the Madam Speaker.
Members, the question before the House is that the member be given sufficient time to bring his presentation to a close. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, House Leader, for your graciousness. It is much appreciated. So, we're now going to be looking at, if this legislation were to pass into law, for non-capital murder, 45 years mandatory minimum sentence, and no eligibility for parole for 40 years. And in the case of capital murder, I believe 50 years mandatory minimum and no eligibility for parole for a long period of time, whatever that is. I may not have got it quite right, but whichever way it is, you're talking about very lifetime in prison, essentially. So what we have to realize, though, colleagues in this House, fellow members, is that in Jamaica, while gang-related killings, the police say, amount to 60 to 70% of murders, that means that 30 to 40% of murders are not of that nature. And domestic violence is a huge problem in the country, and sometimes that results in death. And where you're going to be seeing a situation in which, in a domestic setting, where there may have been abuse and other factors at play, persons getting into a fight, retaliation in the course of a fight, somebody gets stabbed and killed, and they're convicted. You're looking at these very heavy, very excessively long sentences for that category of murder. And that's problematic for me. That's problematic because, yeah, others may see it differently. Others may see it differently. But, I think many people would feel that in a context where somebody has been in an abusive relationship and in the course of being abused seeks to defend themselves, in their own mind, it may have been herself. The circumstances can be such that it may be that the jury doesn't find self-defense was actually arising on the facts. But nevertheless, the overall circumstances of the matter are very different to the circumstances that the minister has spoken to in his statement, which is around the high levels of gun violence and perpetration of that type of murder. So we have different types of murder occurring in the society. And to treat all of them in the same way like this is going to be, I think, problematic for the correctional system and for the court system. So I'm glad that this is going before a joint select committee. I hope that the criminal bar take full advantage of that opportunity and come to this parliament to speak to their experience in the criminal courts so that these decisions can be taken by people who are in the trenches and know what's really happening. That's very important. The other point I wish to make, Minister, is you spoke to the whole question of victims. In fact, the way you put it actually was that from the perspective of persons who have been traumatized by the untimely death of their loved ones, the possibility of imposition of a more punitive sentence will go a long way in preserving the credibility of the justice system. And I accept that the voice of victims is fundamental in the justice system. It is a voice which is not adequately heard in our current arrangements. When I was Minister of Justice, we were developing a victims' charter, which would, for example, require, certainly in cases of violence against victims, but more broadly as well, sexual violence and other forms of violence, that the victim has the opportunity to say to the court what they feel is the appropriate sentence. And if they are not alive, because it's a murder case or a manslaughter case, that their family should be able to do so. We were also looking at victim compensation, a compensation fund for victims of crime. Often they are traumatized, they may have suffered serious injury, sometimes they are rendered paralyzed and are in a wheelchair, whatever it may be. When we are recovering through the Proceeds of Crime Act, billions of dollars from the Asset Recovery Agency, why can't those funds be used to fund a victim compensation fund for the victims of crime in this country? I commend that idea to you. I think it's important that we look after victims properly. We have a victim support unit in the Ministry of Justice, which does good work in trying to help persons who are traumatized cope with that, and also to prepare victims who have to attend court so that they are aware of the process and they're not caught by surprise. But in terms of how victims are treated in court and the role that they play in our criminal justice system, we have not gone far enough. So, Madam Speaker, just to recap, I would say that the proposals in this bill have far-reaching consequences for the justice system and for the prison system, the correctional system, and it is vital that voices who have a stake in this come and be heard at the Joint Select Committee so that the right decisions can be made in relation to these proposals. Thank you, Minister, and we look forward to further dialogue on this. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I would like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his contribution. It's clear, Madam Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition and I are not at cross purposes. We're not at cross purposes. Towards the end, you made the point, which is very important, that victims should play a greater role in the sentencing process. And that is why I'm saying when the Joint Select Committee meets, we need to look how the Plea Bargaining Agreement and Negotiations Act could play a greater role. And I say this, Leader of the Opposition, because there are many, many cases reported to me where people go to court thinking that they're going to give evidence, only to hear that the offender has pleaded guilty under the Criminal Justice Administration Act. And the case is done. And the victims say, but I never had a chance to play a role in the whole process. And that is why I'm saying, whenever there's going to be a guilty plea, the victims or their families should be consulted. Indeed, Leader of the Opposition and colleagues, in the United States of America, 95%, certainly over 90% across all states, convictions are by guilty plea. In other words, less than 10% of the cases are actually tried. Less than 10% of the cases are actually tried, and in most states, 95% is by plea bargaining because of the severity of the punishment. The people really, if they can bargain and get a lesser sentence, they bargain and get a lesser sentence. Certainly, Leader of the Opposition, the Joint Select Committee would allow all stakeholders, including persons who are involved with the correctional services, the probation service, defense attorneys, to make their presentations. But let us not ignore the fact, and it is still on the statute book, that murder was used to be punished by death. Mandatory death. It's only in 2005, I think 2005, we moved away and we split it into capital and non-capital murder. And capital murder, we gave the option of death or life imprisonment. But the truth of the matter, Madam Speaker, 90 and more % of this country believe that when murder is committed, the man must lose his life too. I can tell you. If you go across this country and they criticize me and tell me that this act I'm putting, the bill I'm putting forward, doesn't go far enough, it should be death. Right? So we have to balance, Leader of the Opposition, between the extreme and what is appropriate. I think I would like to say, Leader of the Opposition, that especially in the cases you have mentioned of domestic murder, and some cases which are really, you don't know all the facts, all the circumstances, that in appropriate cases, a plea bargaining arrangement is appropriate, which would give an appropriate sentence. You know, in this, and that is why I leave it open. But we must, and we cannot resile from the fact that at this present time, we have far too many cases of murders, people who believe that life is worth a price or is expendable, and we have to send that message to those killers who premeditated take life. You know, Madam Speaker, it's very sad. You go around the community and people boast about how many dopey they have made. Can you imagine, Madam Speaker, in this country, life is not a premium. And when people can go around and ask how many doppies you have made, it says, Madam Speaker, how we value life. And this amendment must send that signal. We must stop making doppies. So, Madam Speaker, we will name the committee hopefully at the earliest sitting, and we would like all the contributions from across Jamaica, because we must take hold of this matter in Jamaica. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry Paper number 28 of 2023, entitled Annual Report on Audited Financial Statement of the Coconut Industry Board for the year ended December 31, 2020. Annual Report of Petrojam Limited for the financial year 2021-2022. Annual Report for the Broadcasting Corporation, the Broadcasting Commission for the financial year ended 2020-2021. Jamaica, the Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, 453, Volume 1, 48, dated Wednesday, February 15, 2023, number 24, containing the emergency powers, parishes of St. Anne and Clarendon, and specified areas in the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew Regulations 2023 under the Emergency Powers Act. And ruling of the Integrity Commission's Director of Corruption Prosecution regarding the special report of investigation conducted into circumstances surrounding the award of Government of Jamaica contracts to Westcon Construction Limited during the period 2006 to 2009.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next sitting, that the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill entitled The Representation of the People, Postponement of Elections to the Municipal Corporation and City Municipalities Act 2023.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The Offences Against the Person Amendment Act 2023. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2023.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House. First obtained.
Madam Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The Representation of the People, Postponement of Elections to the Municipal Corporations and the City Municipality Act 2023.
A bill shortly entitled The Representation of the People, Postponement of Elections to Municipal Corporations and City Municipalities Act 2023. Read a first time.
Minister, go ahead.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bill.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to introduce and have read first time a bill shortly entitled The Offences Against a Person Amendment Act 2023.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the minister to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2023. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The Offences Against a Person Amendment Act 2023.
A bill shortly entitled The Offences Against the Person Amendment Act 2023, read a first time.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
The criminal justice.
No, we haven't done that.
No, that's okay. Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing order to enable me to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2023.
No, you. Madam Speaker. Administration Amendment Act 2023.
No, wait. Those in favor?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against?
Okay.
Ms. Lowe.
The Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2023, read a first time. And the Offences Against the Person Amendment Act 2023, read a first time.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill. That's it. Go ahead. You go to public business now and then you go in. Hello?
Public business.
Madam Speaker, on the item public business today, it is intended to commence and conclude the debate on the representation of the people, postponement of election to municipal corporations and city municipalities Act 2023 by the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development and member for Kingston Western. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I know
Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of the standing order to allow for the second reading of the bill and to take it through all its stages today.
The question is that there's a suspension of the standing orders to allow the minister, allow us to have the second reading of the bill and for the minister to take it through all its stages. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just over 1 year ago, on January the 25th, 2022, this Honorable House passed an amendment to the Act to temporarily modify the Representation of the People's Act in order to postpone the holding of the general elections of members to serve on the respective councils of the municipal corporation and the general election of mayor for the Portmore municipality. Madam Speaker, at that time the Act provided the authorization to temporarily to suspend the holding of these elections, and the period, Madam Speaker, at that time would have commenced on the 28th of February 2022 and will end on February 28, 2023. Madam Speaker, during that period, we all understand and appreciate the advent of the pandemic. It is now the case that the worst of the pandemic is behind us, and Jamaica's story to the path to recovery continue to gain substantial recognition and praise, Madam Speaker. And in one comment, it was described as nothing short of a miracle. However, this miracle, Madam Speaker, did not come about by chance. It came out of the hard work and the commitment of the people of Jamaica, led by the most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of this country. The resilience and the cooperation of the people of Jamaica, Madam Speaker, is something that we must continue to applaud. They endured all the punches of the pandemic, and they accepted our approach to its management, stage by stage. Today, where we are, Madam Speaker, I want, again on behalf of the government of Prime Minister Andrew Holness, to express our support to the people and to say to them we will continue to serve them in a very positive way. Madam Speaker, it is recognized that our economy recovery is still very fragile. I quote from the latest Article 4 of the consultation of the staff report from the International Monetary Fund on Jamaica. The economy is expected to continue post-COVID recovery. The outlook is subjected to downside risk from potential new wave, higher commodity prices, global slowdown, and tighter than expected global financial conditions. This is a reality, Madam Speaker. We are in a better position than we were last year. But it is clear, Madam Speaker, that we are not yet out of the woods. Madam Speaker, the government is sharply focused on two main things. One, building national resilience against any further economic shock, whether caused by man-made or natural disaster. Two, the expansion and the maintenance of strong economic growth that all our citizens can feel and see at a personal level. It is, Madam Speaker, carefully considered the position of the government that the holding of the municipal elections at this time will carry a significant risk, diverting the country from these two vital tasks. That is fully accepted. Madam Speaker, the elections, Madam Speaker, is of importance. However, the government is seeking a little more time to ensure that the significant expenditure that elections required will be effectively managed alongside other priorities in the economy. You know, Madam Speaker, I want to maintain and not get distracted by my colleagues over there. But it is important, Madam Speaker, that a brief period of postponement will facilitate the conclusion, Madam Speaker, one. And this is of importance, Madam Speaker. It is the commitment of the government that Portmore becomes the 15th parish, Madam Speaker. And such postponement, Madam Speaker, would help us to conclude the consultations that are presently taking place. The Portmore Municipal Council have requested further time for consultations, and we believe that in the interest, Madam Speaker, because we want, when the time rolls around, Madam Speaker, the people of Portmore will move out to cast their votes as the 15th parish of Jamaica, Madam Speaker. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I am presenting this bill to the House today, Madam Speaker, to seek a postponement of the holding of local government elections to February 28, 2024, Madam Speaker. And I urge, Madam Speaker, the support of members of this honourable House in facilitating the postponement. Madam Speaker, I know that there are concerns that are being raised, but the government, Madam Speaker, have weighed the balance, and we believe at this time, where the country is, Madam Speaker, and the fact that we have to consider important issues. An election is important, Madam Speaker, but I urge, Madam Speaker, the patience of the country to understand and respect the decision of the government for the postponement of the elections, Madam Speaker. I thank you.
Madam Speaker, the spokesperson on our side, who would normally respond, the member for North Central St. Catherine, is unfortunately overseas attending to serious family matters, and we wish her well as she pursues that. I was overseas up to a few hours ago, but I wasn't dealing with family matters. But I'm happy to be here because this is a most urgent matter. And so I had to cut my stay to be here. Madam Speaker, despite the tremendous mirth that has been provoked on this side, we regard this as a very serious matter. Jamaica's history of internal governance, which ultimately led to self-governance and then independence, is considered a treasured one. This year alone marks 2 significant anniversaries in testament of that fact. The first is the centenary of the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation, which was established in 1903, well ahead of independence. And the second is the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the Portmore municipality, and in particular, the introduction of direct elections for a mayor. A first in the English-speaking Caribbean, and a precedent which symbolized the important role played by people participation in the determination of community and national development. Madam Speaker, based on these milestones, this country, at the expense of our hard-working taxpayers, has commissioned several studies led by eminent nationals such as the late Professor Rex Nettleford to conduct situation analysis, design recommendations, and chart courses that have included the establishment of the community development committees, the CDCs, and the parish development committees, the PDCs, all contributing to a rich heritage and practice of local governance in this country over many generations. Let me remind also, Madam Speaker, this House, that 2 of our nation's most popular prime ministers, the Right Excellent Sir Alexander Bustamante and the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, commenced their political service as councillors. Yet, Madam Speaker, I don't have to belabor the point, as none other than the current minister, the member from West Kingston himself, a former councillor, has on several occasions carried in the media and who has professed his own understanding of, love for, and commitment of local government as a most integral dimension of good governance and democracy. Therefore, Madam Speaker, one has to ask, why under his watch there seems to have been such a drastic departure from a philosophy he has so often opined. It is indeed tragic, Madam Speaker, that over the years, local government has not been given the pride of place it truly deserves. Recall that not too long ago, it was even reduced to just a department of government. Madam Speaker, the conception of local government was carefully thought out by those who have gone before us. Its existence has proven to be very effective and far-reaching for constituents and the value of representation and services they have received. We ought to be the custodians of its evolution and its preservation. Instead, we have become unwilling witnesses to its demotion. It is true, Madam Speaker, that successive government, and we don't want to come here today to speak about all the past, because, yes, successive governments have postponed these elections at will and have caused the people and their representatives a great degree of uncertainty and apathy. Many argue that it is our treatment of the local authorities that is reflected in decrease in voter turnout in general elections and the decline of citizen participation in national affairs, and even a rejection of civic pride and responsibilities across the society. Madam Speaker, if we are to give truth to the concepts that local government in Jamaica is designed to play a fundamental role, then we have to recognize the following areas: local planning and strategic direction, local sustainable development, community participation, municipal enforcement and regulations in areas such as health, community services, and civic order, parish infrastructure design, construction, and maintenance, and optimizing the value citizens get from public services for their hard-earned tax dollars. So if these are true, then holding of local government elections must be as critical as the holding of general elections. Madam Speaker, it cannot be that the citizens of, I think, 15 parochial divisions are now without representation, some for as long as 4 years, due to death, illness, or even by way of the fact that at the last general elections, a number of local government representatives transitioned to this House. In the 2016 general election campaign, promises made by this government, those promises included an assurance to the people of Jamaica that as a country, we would be moving towards fixed election dates. As a matter of fact, we were given a timeline that this would have been achieved within the first 100 days in office. As at February 25, 3 days from now, that would have been 2,555 days ago. And counting. And not only do we not have fixed elections, we have seen with respect of local government elections, mobile election dates, as the deadlines keep moving and extensions are repeatedly requested. Madam Speaker, the parochial elections were due since 2020. A postponement was sought and given due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will remind this Honourable House, Madam Speaker, that during a spike of that very pandemic, we had general elections. General elections were called. It was a most unfortunate occurrence. The 2016 postponement brought about a bipartisan agreement, and we would not go beyond 4 years. It was agreed by way of an amendment to the law in 2016 that this would be the case going forward. Across the aisle, there was such agreement. So, Madam Speaker, if we are indeed committed to the principles of democracy, that this very fragile process has to be preserved with, then this very fragile process has to be preserved with strong political will. The people of Jamaica deserve nothing less. Regardless of how unfavorable your fortunes might seem, whether you think you can win or lose, it is the people's right to choose. It is the people's franchise to exercise, and their right to do this must be held sacred, irrespective of the outcomes for the politicians involved. Outside of a disaster or a pandemic, we are unable to fathom why the government believes it can pay such scant regard to the rights of the people. To suggest that you are postponing the democratically due elections because of the 3 reasons stated, especially those relating to the economy, when you brag every day about recovering stronger, it's incomprehensible. Have you misled the Parliament? Have you lied to the people of Jamaica about this recovery? What is the real reason for postponing the local government elections? What happens at the expiration of this period if you decide that the economy is still not where you want it to be? Will there be another postponement? Madam Speaker, we ask these questions on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans watching who are confused as we are and who we posit are also becoming increasingly suspicious of the motives of this government and ashamed at this and their abandonment of good governance and the time-honored principles of our vibrant democracy. Madam Speaker, we will not support this bill this afternoon. I thank you.
Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of all the comments made by the Leader of Opposition Business in the House a moment ago on the bill that is before us. Full support. And I make a few further remarks as further to the minister's statement as it relates to Portmore. He just said that this postponement will enable consultation in Portmore and the proposed 15 parish. Madam Speaker, you would have known that the very same consultations that he referred to that is being allowed following the request made by the municipality of Portmore was what has been begged for when the Joint Select Committee met to deal with the proposal. And they had 2 virtual meetings with 28 participants and came to the country and said, we had consultation. 3 virtual meetings with 28 persons. 6 was able to participate online, and that constituted consultation. And say it was, yes, it was transformational. And Madam Speaker, those exercises
were
order, kept.
Madam Speaker.
You're not on the floor.
Order, Madam Speaker.
What's the point of order?
Madam Speaker, please allow me to speak from the seat that is not mine. The member is misleading the House, Madam Speaker. It was actually 3 consultations, and persons were asked to give their information to the committee, which they did, which was more than 28, Madam Speaker. So the member should retract his statement because the member is misleading the House.
Madam Speaker, if that is a substantive point, God forbid, if that was your substantive intervention, Madam Speaker, the records of the Parliament will speak for itself. I stand by my comments. Madam Speaker, which the point I raise about consultation is something I feel very strongly about. And I tell you why. The Portmore municipality construct, as it is and has been for the past 20 years that the member made reference to, was not the creation of a People's National Party government. That came about because of strenuous representation by the people of Portmore. The administration of the day then merely facilitated their express will, as every democratic government ought to do. That's what happened. And there were the provisions in the construct that we have now was shaped and framed by the people of Portmore, the residents, not the political leaders. I've been one of them from then. Listen to them. In the draft bill that has come to light in its transmission to the municipality of Portmore, there are some very egregious provisions in that draft bill. One, it seeks to destroy, to bring to an end the direct election of Mayor of Portmore as the people of Portmore sought and obtained. It was not the PNP administration that proposed it. It wasn't the PNP administration that caused it to be. The people of Portmore, the residents, through their various citizen associations, various stakeholder groups, through extensive consultations throughout the communities of Portmore. Art Academy in Southeast St. Catherine was the center of many of those discussions. They demanded that their mayor must never be elected by a group of councillors of whichever party that forms the majority. It should be by the people of Portmore directly electing their mayor. They got it. And the draft bill that the government has put forward seek to eradicate that. Eradicate that. by repealing the act that made that provision and made no other subsequent provision. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the boundaries of Portmore. I recall very clearly when the municipality's creation was being pursued, it was suggested that for it to happen, there has to be a part of another parish. And a part of St. Andrew was proposed. It was vigorously rejected by the people of Portmore. People of Portmore, across the board. That rejection brought about the construct we now have. But they felt so strongly, that they said any subsequent revision of the boundary must never be left to the political directorate alone. Because they do not want the political directorate of whichever party to unilaterally impose a boundary on them. At the time, that they decided to run a boundary around all the occupied areas south or west of St. Andrew. And so you have communities like, for example, Caribbean Estate. It's not in the Portmore current boundary because that area was an empty land at the time. But the people of Portmore recognize that for Portmore to grow and develop, we need more inclusion of more land mass to facilitate the development of Portmore for light industrial development, etc. In fact, the government's proposed Greater Bernard Lodge development include much of those lands which are to the west of the existing boundary of Portmore. But they said, come back to the people so that you, government, of whichever party, don't do it by yourself without consultation with us. And so in law, a provision was made to have at least 7% of the registered voters in the then established boundaries participate to either accept or reject any new boundaries. That was how strongly they felt, and the government of the day responded by providing it in law. Because we acknowledge and accept then that the people must play an integral role in shaping their community. The proposed legislation for which the minister made reference remove that entirely and now make provision for the minister and the government of the day to by themselves determine what the boundaries of that new proposed parish would be. And I say that against the background, Madam Speaker, that we as a country have come a far way. One of our great accomplishments across the aisle was the Electoral Advisory Commission, where a level of maturity prevailed, led at the time by Mr. Siaga and Mr. Michael Manley, to remove political boundary determination from the incumbent political administration and place that entirely in the bipartisan Electoral Commission. That was a maturity that was demonstrated, and it has lasted up until today. That no election since then, either party has able to, in any meaningful way, comment about the fairness of the system. Member from North Central St. Andrew was a member of that effort and gave sterling work then in accomplishing what we have now. What the proposals are now is for the government of the day to now determine political boundaries. Madam Speaker, it is a sad day in our political history, that a government in 2022-2023 is seeking to reverse those gains to suppress democracy in a most vulgar way for convenient political advantage. That's what the member spoke about in his mention about the consultation for Portmore. Thirdly, Madam Speaker, just to, Madam Speaker, the boundary provisions for Portmore, the direct election of mayor, were two central proposals by the citizens of Portmore. And there was a third one. That wasn't taken at the time because of the newness of the proposal. And that was for the recall of that directly elected mayor. And after consultation across the aisle, we decided that since the model was new, it might complicate matters going forward, and that was deferred for the review of the Portmore municipality in its form for extension, for extension elsewhere. What ought to happen is for that review and the proposal of the Portmore model for its implementation, possibly implementation elsewhere. Madam Speaker,
Member, I trust you're about to wind up.
I am about to wind up, Madam. Save for the disruption I'm getting from members over there. Madam Speaker, I am happy that there is a process of consultation. So, Minister, I acknowledge your acknowledgement of that consultation, and I hope that great attention will be paid to the outcome of those consultations, and the voice of the people of Portmore be central to any decision that this Parliament makes that disrupt or rearrange their local government arrangement. I thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
May I just correct myself? In the case of a debate on the bill, each person does have half an hour in the standing orders. So you had only gone 12 minutes. So the next person is the person from St. Andrews Southwestern, is it? From St. Catherine Southeast.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I allow to speak from this seat that is not mine? Madam Speaker, I rise to support the motion to postpone the local government elections. Madam Speaker, the reasons are clearly outlined by my colleague minister, which I fully endorse. Madam Speaker, there has been tremendous consultations and work done. But work is still being undertaken, Madam Speaker, to establish Portmore as Jamaica's 15th parish. There is much anticipation that the process should be completed before the next local government elections are announced. Madam Speaker, to fully achieve the fruits of our labor in seeing Portmore organized as a parish will require time and resources in order to address some of the challenges that the current designation does not address. Madam Speaker, the reality is there needs to be addressed if our residents are to fully benefit from this exercise. For instance, Madam Speaker, a part of Greater Portmore North that my goodly friend from St. Catherine South is the MP for for the time being. Can vote, Madam Speaker. They can vote for the councillor, but not able to exercise their franchise to vote for a Portmore mayoral candidate. This cannot be right or reasonable, as these citizens, Madam Speaker, would have contributed to the social and economic activities of the city municipality. If you really look at it, Madam Speaker, the elected mayor in Portmore city municipality doesn't have real power to enact change. It's really the 12 elected councillors who have the power for change. Even the lands, Madam Speaker, that should have been owned by the Portmore City Municipal Council are being held in trust by the St. Catherine Municipal Council. Madam Speaker, even the 12 councillors for Portmore must attend meeting at the St. Catherine Municipal Council. If they fail to do so, they will not be paid. This needs to be addressed. Madam Speaker, listen. Madam Speaker, we need parish status for Portmore before the next local government elections, so Portmore can have its own identity and increase purchasing power as a parish. Madam Speaker, with this said, I would restate my support for the postponement of the local government elections to give more time to address the challenges in Portmore so that our constituents, citizens, businesses, and all stakeholders can better prepare ourselves and be a part of this historic achievement of Portmore being the 15th parish. Madam Speaker, if it please you, members, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Well done.
Madam Speaker, I never thought there would have been a need for me to stand in such a debate in this House. And Madam Speaker, I tell you what. I became a councillor in 1997, and I remember how long it took us before we went to the next local government election. I have been a strong proponent of local government because I really believe that governance really is best exercised at the closest level to those who it will affect. As I look back as a councillor on how we have treated across administrations, local government, I was pleased in 2016 when we came to this House and elsewhere to pass the bill, pass the 3 strategic laws that meant that we were turning a new leaf and that we were changing the way we saw local government and the way we operated around local government. So let us be clear. Yes, under both administrations, we have pushed the timeline. And yes, it has not been fair. There has been even an administration with the stroke of a pen that just dissolved the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation at the time. The bills that we put in place were meant to prevent that. Madam Speaker, it has fallen to this administration for the first time in our history to give meaning to those 3 strategic laws that we passed. And we passed it with bipartisan support, or at least I thought so. I thought that we were all agreed that the time had come to stop treating local government as if it is a bastard child or a second cousin. I thought we had gotten to that point. This government has had an opportunity to show the metal that it has been made of, that it is made of. It failed, Madam Speaker, not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but here we are again, the 4th time, when it is failing the people of Jamaica. And I am saying, as I stand here, that I am embarrassed, that I am ashamed, that I think it is pathetic that in 2023, this is what we should take to Parliament around local government. Madam Speaker, our people deserve much better than this. The leader of opposition business alluded to it, that we probably have around 16 persons who, by virtue of having died while in office or being ill, are unable to actually do the work. That's 16. That does not include, Madam Speaker, the number of persons who are basically doing nothing because they have long thought that they would have been in retirement. That because they are tired, because they want to go home, because they thought in 2020 that they were coming to the end of their tenure. I believe that for us to keep on shifting the goalpost, forcing those individuals to sit in the chair and not to fully represent the people who elected them to serve is, honest to goodness, unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Madam Speaker, if you know me, and the proponent that I am of local government, you would know that I stand here speaking honestly and from the heart. Because I believe that local government is really where it is at. So at this point, I don't want to hear about all that went before, because we have 3 strategic laws that now guide us. And with the passing of those laws, we turn the corner with a new approach to local government. So we shouldn't be playing footsie. We should not be playing footsie with local government in terms of that moving date that we have. Madam Speaker, I honestly believe that to bring this motion today, this bill, at this time, is a smack, it's like a slap in the face of our local government representatives and, in fact, the people they serve. And let me tell you why. By now, we are at a point in the month when it is obvious that we cannot hold legally the local government election. You are telling me that not even the respect of bringing this bill in time could have been afforded? I don't buy that. I don't buy that. I am tempted to believe, because I know the Minister of Local Government, who himself has a long tradition and healthy tradition in local government, that this couldn't be of his own making. It could not be of his own making. It could not be of his own making. Because I know he believes in local government. It must be uncomfortable. He must be uncomfortable. Then, Madam Speaker, I'm going to look at the 3 reasons that have been proffered. One is the issue of the Portmore municipality, and my colleague from St. Catherine South has dealt with that one. So I'll leave that one adequately. I'll leave that one for the time being. But, Madam Speaker, to say that the high level of uncertainty of the global economic environment, which may have domestic implications and requires the government to focus at this time on building resilience to possible future shocks, as well as setting the country on a path of sustained growth, is really not believable.
You're not sure?
It is not believable. It is not believable. And I'm placing that on record. And I think that that is important, Madam Speaker, because we already have the instance where we accepted that the pandemic was enough reason for us to postpone the local government election, but found ourselves in the midst of that crisis with a flare-up of the pandemic going into a general election. What that means, and we have to understand what it means when we behave like this. We injure, we damage the foundation of the confidence that Jamaicans should have in us when we make these statements. And then I want to go to the third reason. The third reason speaks about the high monetary cost of holding elections, which requires the budget for electoral matters to be managed efficiently, and the existence of a number of critical budgetary priorities that need to be given precedence at this time. Madam Speaker, that is the role of government every single day, to make decisions and to choose priorities. It is called choice making, and that is the role that you're called upon to play. When I see this anywhere else in the world, when people raise these issues to prevent an election, you can look at it and understand that we are in the midst of what we call democratic backsliding. That's what it is called. Because these are governments who primarily don't believe in democracy, but have chosen this as an excuse and as a pretext not to have the election. Because what it means, Madam Speaker, is that for any future election, this could be pulled out and used as a pretext for which we will not have the election. So, Madam Speaker, today I put my full support, 100% support, behind the statement made by the leader of opposition business in terms of the bill that is before us. It is a sad day for local government in Jamaica, and I am ashamed, totally ashamed, to be a part of this parliament with such a bill before us.
Madam Speaker, I didn't plan to speak, but when I saw item 3 in the memorandum of objects and reasons, I had to get up. And I'm going to tell you why I get up. To great applause on this side, every time the Minister of Finance comes to Parliament, he announces how well the economy is doing. And let me remind you, for the fiscal year that we are in, the government has collected over $80 billion above its own estimates. Tax revenues, $80 billion. $80 billion. $80 billion. I say it because it is all of Jamaica who pays it in more GCT, in SCT on imports, all of Jamaica. Yeah. Right? 80 billion more this financial year. Madam Speaker, the cost of holding an election is about $1.5 billion. In the height of COVID, when the economy fell by 13% of GDP, when we had to close our airports and seaports, when we lost our tourism industry, the government called a general election. September 2020, early, when the economy had lost 13% of GDP, and we lost billions of dollars in revenue. So for you to come here with this reason, number 3, on the paper, when the budget table last week budget, I don't know if you read it yet, joke business. It's better. Joke business. It's better you never put this on the paper, Desmond. It's better you never put this on the paper. More than talk. Yeah. Madam Speaker, a government has a responsibility to budget for an election. They have a responsibility in good times and bad times. Madam Speaker. All right, Tony. In good times and bad times, you have a responsibility to budget for an election. This election was known. It never catch anybody like Nicodemus in the night. Overdue. It is overdue. The government has the revenues to do it. But the government afraid to face the people.
That's it.
They're afraid to face the people. Yeah. And you come here with this reason about economic uncertainty. When last week you were trumpeting how the Financial Times say you have a miracle, standing ovation, how great the economy is doing, and you put on paper economic reasons for not calling the election. I say shame.
Yeah, man.
I say shame.
Shame.
Face the people.
Yeah.
Let the people them decide.
Yeah.
Let the people decide.
Yeah.
So I stand in opposition to this.
Yeah.
The minister don't even believe what I say. Him don't even believe what him really saying. Yeah. Right? You never plan to bring it here. Parliament adjourn and we have to come back and you come bring it here.
Yeah.
We must do better than this. Yeah. We know say PMP postpone election too, you know. So we have had it on both sides. But we made a departure when we brought the 3 strategic bills for that very reason, you know. Because we say a minister can't just whimsically keep postponing local government elections. Mm-hmm. Right? So the point is we must do better. We have vacancies where people have been elevated to parliament. We have vacancies where people have died or migrated. The people deserve to make their choice of whoever they want. And the government mustn't afraid of the people by coming here, frankly, with this rubbish argument.
The next person I have down for speaking is the member from St. Catherine, East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I would love for the member from St. Mary, who is a former councillor, and a good one too, I would not, and a former mayor. To give me the support and a listening ear. Madam Speaker, when I look at both sides of the aisles, I have seen faces that were in the municipality. At that time it was the parish council. Mayors, councillors on both sides. And I remember very well when we used to be at council and to listen to this parliament speaking about us as we were bastard children at the time. And we felt bad. Many of us inside here, including the minister, we have some long, long nights, because I have been in the council. Not me and you, not me and you. Let us, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I know that the minister knows that it could be nothing else more than local government. But just to say, Madam Speaker, that I remembered very well when we started out with the cemetery, the parks, and markets. That was what was left of local government. We fought long and hard in terms of getting the reform done. I am very sad today because I spent a number of years fighting with ALGA, fighting with the Association of Local Government in the Caribbean, CALGA, to empower and to make sure we get local government not just entrenched, but deeply entrenched, so that today we would, today we would not be having this conversation. Madam Speaker, we should not be even having a discussion today, if we were doing it well, that we would have a minister of local government, because the reform was to take us to that level where the municipalities could stand on their own and you have an administration in central government to just administer. And I'm certain I'm correct. And Madam Chair, all of us inside here have councillors listening to us and is wondering today if this is how we see them and how we take them in worth. And I am very, very saddened today. Yes, we have challenges why we are not and we cannot call local government election. It is too long. Last year, we were told that not later than February. When you said not later in mathematics, it means you can go beyond. Not later than February 2023, we would have called a local government election. The councillors are anticipating a local government election long ago. They have made preparation, they have gone out there, they have made consultation. And Madam Speaker, suppose next year something happened drastically and we cannot get Portmore municipalities or the Portmore parish to Portmore to become a parish. We are going to do another postponement? And we're going to continue postponing because we believe that the people out there are stupid. But I want to say, Madam Speaker, we need to behave maturely inside here. We need to understand that we are talking about councillors who have served long and hard for the local authorities. Some of the councillors out there have made sure that we can come here to do the laws of the land because they are out there taking care of the day-to-day activities for us. And, Madam Speaker, I believe the time has come to give them a new mandate. It's not anything that they are begging for. It is what they are entitled to. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I stand today to oppose any further extension of not holding a local government election.
Yes. Madam Speaker, this bill really is an embarrassment because it represents an approach which Jamaica should have gotten rid of once and for all, and thought it had done in 2016. Prior to the reform of local government, which culminated in 2016, it was the practice for political considerations to guide when local government elections were called, and they were often postponed if the party in power didn't feel that it was to their advantage to keep it at the time when it was due. And there was consensus that that was no longer an acceptable way of moving forward, and that local government was a central part of governance in the country. So the last administration from this side did two things. First of all, and this hasn't actually been mentioned in the debate, the Constitution was amended to enshrine local government in the Constitution in 2015. This is the act that did it, Act 14 of 2015. And I'm just going to read the recitals. Whereas a constitutional commission established by Parliament recommended inter alia that provision should be made for the inclusion of the system of local government in the Constitution of Jamaica, And whereas the recommendations of the Constitutional Commission were endorsed by a joint select committee of Parliament. And it goes on. The Act itself amended Section 66 of the Constitution and inserted a new provision in it that says there shall continue to be a democratic system of local government for Jamaica, and it made provision for the holding of local government elections. It didn't prescribe the time frame. The 3 strategic laws were then passed a year later, in February 2016. One of them, the Local Governance Act, amended the Representation of the People's Act, ROPA, which is the legislation that governs elections in Jamaica, and inserted a new schedule, the 8th schedule. And I think the media need to pay attention to this because they don't seem to understand the situation. It provided for a fixed 4-year cycle for local government elections, with a 90-day window commencing on the 4th anniversary of the last local government elections, in which local government elections must be held. There was no provision for any extension. When COVID licked and Jamaica was reeling, they called a general election in the heights of COVID. It resulted in community spread. Local government elections fell due by February 2021. They came to this Parliament with a bill to extend it for a year, citing COVID as a reason. We didn't oppose it, because although we saw and highlighted the rank hypocrisy in what they were doing, given that they had just called a general election in the height of COVID with devastating consequences for the country, they were extending local government and the period for it by 1 year. But COVID was on the land, and we were responsible, and we said, we understand, we will let it go. February 2022, they brought legislation here. On the very day that the Prime Minister announced in this House that there would be no more need for disaster risk management orders, and social distancing was a thing of the past, and Jamaica was back to normal and was going to be building back for recovery. The very same day, the minister brought another bill to amend the law again, citing COVID as a reason. It was spurious then, and this is spurious now. That year has expired, and they're coming here again because they don't want to call election now, and citing economic reasons for it. The Minister for South East St. Andrew. Our Minister. The member for South East St. Andrew and future Minister of Finance said pointed out that to be citing economic and financial reasons for undermining democracy in the country and acting inconsistently with the spirit of the Constitution that provides for a democratic system of governance is spurious and disingenuous and cannot be supported. They are collecting, according to the current Minister of Finance, they are collecting over $80 billion from the people in additional tax revenue this fiscal year over what they budgeted. And I must tell you, that the last fiscal year, they collected $99 billion, more than they had originally budgeted for that fiscal year. And this coming fiscal year, he has mentioned how much more again is going to be taken from the people. And you can't use $1.3 billion of that to make the people decide who their local representatives should be. It is a disgrace, and we will not support it. The 2016 was supposed to be a change, a more mature approach to this matter. No more would the political shenanigans hold sway. Well, under this minister and this government, they are still holding sway. We don't support it. We will vote against this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, you know, I had taken the decision earlier not to participate in this debate because I believe it is a simple matter that we should all agree on. But my colleagues on both sides of the aisle raised some very important points. And I must say that I agree in part with all the comments, those from persons on this side and those on the other side. But Madam Speaker, successive administrations really looked upon local government as a bastard child. All of us here who are from the local government system, which I believe, Madam Speaker, is where you have real representation, because at the local level we are more connected with the people, the concerns, the needs of the people. And you will see, Madam Speaker, that those of us who excel as members of Parliament would have some level of connection with local government. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I recall my days as a councillor, deputy mayor, and mayor. And we used to argue then, myself, the member from Kingston Western, the member from Kingston, St. Mary Western, and my colleagues over on the other side who sat in council throughout the island with me. We would always criticize the government of the day whenever they delay a local government election. In fact, Madam Speaker, the last time a local government election was held on time was under a Jamaica Labour Party government, some 41 years ago.
What do you mean with the point?
And so, Madam Speaker, this is not about politics, you know. This is about people's lives. And that's why I started out by saying, Madam Speaker, that I agree with most of the sentiments. But if we are to be truthful to ourselves, and the member from St. Catherine Southern being an advocate for democracy, as he always says, would look back and look into himself that the process of which he was a part with the establishment of the municipality of Portmore in 2003 was a starting point where we wanted to revolutionize the look, the feel of local governance. And it has brought us to the point where the leader of opposition spoke to the changes that have been made to the Constitution to accommodate local government. But we must also look at the fact that a commitment was made for the first time in decades to really ensure that we have a complete local governance system. A system that will see all the people in Jamaica fall under one umbrella of equal rights under local government. And if the member from St. Catherine South is truthful to himself, yes, he would have stated here that the government of the day wanted to have local government election before the end of February. In fact, Madam Speaker, yes, the bill was sent to the Municipal Council in Portmore for their comments.
Absolutely.
That was sent in September of last year, yes, Madam Speaker.
Yes.
And so if the member and his team and those on that side are really serious about local government and local governance, they would have responded
exactly
long ago so we could move ahead the process of establishing Portmore as Jamaica's Portmore as Jamaica's 15th parish by last year. And so we would be in a position to complete the process of having 15 parishes in Jamaica, having local government before the end of February 23, as promised. And there would have been no need, Madam Speaker, for us to be deliberating at this time and throwing words at each other. Madam Speaker, the municipality of Portmore, which is controlled by the opposition, there are 10 PNP councillors to 2 Jamaica Labour Party councillors. There is a mayor also that belongs to the PNP. And if they were serious, Madam Speaker, about local government, local governance, and the old enough for local government election, they would have done the right thing. Madam Speaker, in fact, I was at a town hall meeting, Madam Speaker, where I was not invited, but my vote is in Portmore. And a number of persons who are speaking on Portmore, they do not even pass through Portmore unless they are going to Port Henderson Road. To our fish. And festival. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Local Government and his team were very proactive. The draft bill was sent to the Portmore Municipal Council for their comments. They should have completed the process sometime in October. They asked for an extension. When that extension was granted, Madam Speaker, they asked for an extension. For their comments. For their comments, Madam Speaker. They delayed, Madam Speaker, and they did not even comment or made an attempt to respond until they sent out a notice January 2nd of 2023 informing the people of Portmore of a town hall meeting. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, those of us on the other side who want us to believe that they are so concerned about the people of Portmore, the people of Jamaica and local government, Madam Speaker, they are hypocrites. Yes. Madam Speaker, no one can refute what I'm saying. The facts are there. The facts are before us. Madam Speaker, I would have loved for us to have local government election this month. I am prepared. The Jamaica Labour Party is prepared, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, we can show them all the paraphernalia for an election, local government election. All our candidates are in place, Madam Speaker. But we cannot disenfranchise the people of Portmore just for political reasons, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I beg that we let Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, we are all disappointed that we have to go this route. We are all disappointed, Madam Speaker, that we have to go this route. But we are not selfish. Madam Speaker, I would implore the members on that side to fast track and assist us, support us in establishing Portmore as Jamaica's 15th parish so that we can get on with the business of the people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Just a minute. The next speaker is the speaker from St. Catherine, East Central.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I rise to lend my voice in support of the Minister of Local Government. Madam Speaker, in 2016, the people of Portmore made the decision that they would no longer suffer in poverty and in poor economic conditions and structural deficiencies in Portmore, and they decided that they would move onto the path of prosperity. In 2016, Madam Speaker, the people of Portmore elected for the first time in 36 years a member of the Jamaica Labour Party, and I stand as their proud representative. In 2020, the Prime Minister, having announced as a part of the mandate of the Jamaica Labour Party that Portmore will become the 15th parish in Jamaica, the people of Portmore logged on to the vision of further prosperity and development in Portmore and elected a second member of the Jamaica Labour Party. So, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, it is very clear to me and to all those seated on this side and even on that side that the people of Portmore are prepared and have placed their trust in the wisdom and direction of the Prime Minister and the government of the Jamaica Labour Party. Madam Speaker, I listened to the reasons proffered by the Minister of Local Government, and I listened to the negative comments as it relates to the economic point he raised. But, Madam Speaker, I want the people of Jamaica to understand that when it comes on to good governance and economic prosperity, no other government has taken Jamaica out of poverty and into prosperity than the Jamaica Labour Party has. And we have always been able to achieve that with sound economic policies. Madam Speaker, I recall when Manayad was Minister of Finance, and he announced that effective April 1st, 2017, we were going to move the income tax threshold to 1.5. And, Madam Speaker, it was met with great objection. It cannot work, it will not work. Madam Speaker, to this day, 1.5 continues to work and has been one of the best economic policies in this country. Madam Speaker, I recall during the COVID pandemic when voices in the opposition compared Jamaica to Suriname and said Suriname is spending some 5-point-something% of GDP towards helping the people, etc. Jamaica's economic recovery, Jamaica's financial contribution per household is woefully inadequate. Madam Speaker, the finance minister and the government said, this is what we're doing in terms of economic policies, and look at where Suriname is now versus Jamaica today. Madam Speaker, our economic recovery, whilst Jamaica can boast top in terms of our peers in the Caribbean and other countries in the world, but as the minister has indicated, we are not out of the woods as yet, Madam Speaker. We have to trust the government to continue to guide us on the path of economic recovery. Madam Speaker, as it relates to the point of Portmore becoming the 15th parish, from the consultations we've had across East Central St. Catherine, Madam Speaker, I met in town halls, in schools, I met with persons. Madam Speaker, we did our canvassing of the point, and the people of East Central are ready to have Portmore become the 15th parish of Jamaica. To have a local government election now, without setting the boundaries for Portmore, without making Portmore become the 15th parish, would not only renege on the mandate and commitment of the Jamaica Labour Party prior to the 2020 election, but it would serve to disenfranchise and leave my people of East Central St. Catherine behind, and I cannot support that, my lady. Madam Speaker, presently, how Portmore is structured, I have a division, the Portmore Pines division, which includes Lakes Pen, which is properly Spanish Town, and Lime Tree, properly Spanish Town. Madam Speaker, whilst they vote for the councillor of the Lakes Pen division, Madam Speaker, they cannot vote for a mayor of Portmore because it is recognized that they do not sit in Portmore. Madam Speaker, they don't sit in Portmore. It is, Madam Speaker, it is, Madam Speaker, the boundary situation in Portmore is untenable. Madam Speaker, you can see that this point evokes a large threshold of emotions as well. However, Madam Speaker, as is, the present boundary situation in Portmore cannot continue. It is untenable, and if we were to sit here and proceed with another local government election without having rectified the boundaries and without Portmore having been named as the 15th parish, we will do a great disservice to the local governance structure itself and how we service or provide service to the people of this country. And so, Madam Speaker, I stand in support of the Minister of Local Government and in support of democracy for the people of East Central St. Catherine and the people of Jamaica as a whole. I thank you.
Madam Speaker, this debate. Madam Speaker, this debate has gone now from the sublime to the ridiculous. The fact is, we're here to debate. We're here to debate.
You know, the behavior of members on both sides have not yielded to when I seek protection. Please allow the member to speak. Right.
Madam Speaker, we're here to debate the extension of the holding of the local government election and to debate the bill before us. The reasons advanced by the minister to support the bill is patently insupportable. Patently insupportable. Madam Speaker, I thought we would have.
It is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Everybody is guilty this evening.
Madam Speaker, I, in respect of the last, the arguments by the last speaker, I thought that he was arguing that the postponement of the election would allow for the people of Portmore to elect not only their councillor, but to make sure that the arrangements in Portmore, that the people of Portmore has fought for, that those arrangements would be honored and to be respected. The fact is that even if the change occurs now, the debate, the argument about Portmore is about their right to elect, to have a direct election of mayor of Portmore. That's the argument that is being pursued in Portmore. So the point was made earlier that the democracy that the people of Portmore fought for was assaulted, and it's being assaulted now by a draft bill that says that there will no longer be any direct election of the mayor of Portmore. And those are central issues to be discussed and debated within Portmore and to be addressed by the bill tabled about the 15 parish for Portmore. What we're here speaking about is a postponement for the wider Jamaica of the local government election. And none of these of the arguments that have been advanced are supportable. In fact, they are incredible. They are incredulous. And for that reason, we cannot support this bill. And it will not be supported. And we should get on with the business and to stop that debate.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members. Whether the views were positive or negative, I want to say thanks. I want to thank the member from South St. Catherine. Southeast St. Catherine. South Central St. Catherine, who made a contribution, Madam Speaker, which touched some sensitive points, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I did not intend in the debate to turn back the hands of time. But I am forced to because of comments made on that side. Madam Speaker, that side can't speak about free and fair and democratic elections. They can't talk about that, Madam Speaker. Because they, Madam Speaker, in 1976, now, would have contested general elections and local government elections under a state of public emergency where the freedom of candidates were restricted, supporters were arrested. So they can't talk about democracy and trampling on democracy, Madam Speaker. They can't. Madam Speaker, the question of the boundaries of court was raised. Madam Speaker, you can research local government anywhere in the world. You can, Madam Speaker, research local government anywhere in the world and ask the question, in which municipality in the world that councillors have the opportunity of serving at the same time in two separate municipalities? Nowhere in the world it exists. But Jamaica, ask yourselves the question why we have dual seating in St. Catherine and in Portmore. Without the Portmore councillors sitting, the results in St. Catherine would be totally different. It was their Minister of Local Government. It was their, Madam Speaker, it was under their administration that the boundaries of Portmore was adjusted to suit them, Madam Speaker. Under their administration. What we are doing, what is the intention of this administration, is to reverse, Madam Speaker, and to grant the boundaries of Portmore that existed before it was changed by their administration, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker,
what is a point of order?
Of the boundaries. The subsequent proposed realignment of the boundaries was done by the Electoral Office of Jamaica, for which both sides participated in, including that member over there, and including that member over there. They sat at the table for the proposed realignment in 2010. It was done by the EOJ, and the member is misleading this house.
Madam Speaker, again, Madam Speaker, it was done by ministerial order. Madam Speaker, it was the Minister of Local Government at the time. Of course. The member from Southwest Clarendon. Yes. That made it. Okay, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me say that while we acknowledge the concerns raised about not holding the elections on the date and time specified, Madam Speaker, there are reasonable grounds for the country to be concerned. Madam Speaker, remember, Madam Speaker, Jamaica, Madam Speaker, depends heavily on foreign exchange. Madam Speaker, our economy is still, Madam Speaker, at a point where anything can happen, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we as a government are not afraid to face the electorate, because we are prepared to go out there and face the country based on our track record of performance as a government. Madam Speaker, they talk about not recognizing local government. The greatest improvement in local government in the history of this country was done by the government of Prime Minister Andrew Holness since 2016. Madam Speaker, it was under Labour Party administration that councillors started receive salaries, Madam Speaker, under Labour Party administration. When I became a councillor in 1977, Madam Speaker, you just go turn up a meeting, you get a little pittance for travelling, Madam Speaker. It was a government of the Jamaica Labour Party, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I understand the concerns, but we, Madam Speaker, you talk about Jack Myers. What you know? What you know? Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, they're talking about the opposition. Raise the point about postponement, Madam Speaker. You know, under their administration, councillors became pensionable because they never got to the polls, Madam Speaker. We're not here exchanging who do this and who do that, you know, Madam Speaker. What we are saying, that the opposition must understand and appreciate that all is not clear on the Western Front. The government needs time. We, Madam Speaker, is committed to make Portmore the 15th parish. We're not getting the support that we want out of certain sector of Portmore as it relates to that, Madam Speaker. The member outlined the details, Madam Speaker. The failure to respond. Failure to respond, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in closing, Madam Speaker, this administration, and I know people will say that they have heard it before, our track record is clear. Right? We're not afraid of facing the electorates. And some of them who you're talking about, we are afraid. Ask them what their position is if we call it tomorrow. So, Madam Speaker, in closing, democracy under the government of Prime Minister Andrew Holness is safe. We have no doubt, Madam Speaker, the country should have no doubt about the commitment of this administration. But I would urge my fellow Jamaicans to work with us to accept this postponement and let us complete the work that we have committed ourselves to do by building a brighter future, not just for the other parts of Jamaica, but to free Portmore from the chains that have enslaved them over years because of the failure of that side, Madam Speaker, to recognize and to respect them, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, on that note, Madam Speaker, I ask now that the bill be considered, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
That's a question before the House, is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against?
Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Bartlett is absent.
Members, the debate is over and there's a divide. Can you be quiet and listen to your names?
Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Brown?
Listen. Members of this House, please listen to your names. Also, in a divide when you're asked, what is your answer? It's not yes or no, you know. Listen to the question before you answer. And be careful because it's going to be recorded. A word to the wise. Listen.
All right. All right. Mr. Brown? Dr. Brown Burke? Dr. Chang? You can say it. Dr. Charles? Mr. Charles? Mr. Chin? Mr. Chuck? Mr. Clark? Dr. Clark? Mr. Cousins? Miss Crawford? Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn? Miss Daly? Miss Davis? Mr. Davis? Both of them.
Aye.
Mr. Dunn? Dr. Dunn?
It's important. Yes, he said so.
Mr. Golding? Mr. Graham? Miss Grange? Mr. Green? Dr. Guy? Miss Hamilton? Miss Hannah? Mr. Henriquez? Mr. Henry? Mr. Holness? Mrs. Holness? Mr. Hutchinson? Mr. Hilton? Mr. Jackson? Mr. Lawrence? Miss Lee? Mrs. Malaufort? Mr. Main? Mr. McKenzie? Mr. Miller? Miss Morrison? Mr. Montague? Mr. Morgan? Mrs. Nita Garvey? Mr. Paulwell? Mr. Phillips? Dr. Phillips? Mr. Robertson? Mr. Robinson? Mr. Samuda? Mr. Shaw? Mr. Siblist? Mr. Slowly? Miss Smith? Mr. Terry Long? Dr. Tufton? Mrs. Vaz? Mr. Vaz? Mr. Warmington? Dr. Wheatley? Mr. Williams? Mrs. Williams? Mr. Wilson? Mr. Witter? Mr. Wright?
Members. The ayes have 29 and the nays have 8. Madam Clerk, hold a minute. Madam Clerk, read the bill a second time.
A bill entitled An Act to Temporarily Modify the Representation of the People Act in order to postpone the holding of a general election of members to serve on the respective councils of municipal corporations and a general election of the mayors of the city municipalities read a second time.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill has been passed. The House now has to resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Look here.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Madam Chairman.
Yes.
I noticed that a new member has occupied the position of leader of opposition business. I would like to offer my congratulations for the elevation of the member from Central Westmoreland. The member believes in democracy, and the member has risen to the occasion to fill the void left by those who were sent here to look about the people's business. They have abandoned the people's business and their responsibilities. I therefore would like to move that this honorable House confers and confirms the member from Central Westmoreland as the leader of opposition, not opposition business. That, Madam Speaker, I would ask that you give it consideration and at a suitable time put that motion to the House.
Today is not the 1st of April, so I'm not going to consider what you have asked me to do. In the meantime, to move to the more serious business, is the mace is now lowered and we are now in committee stage, and I would like to put the clauses to the members. I now put clause 1. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and the enacting clause. Those in favor? Those
Aye.
against? The ayes have it. The question is, members, that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without any amendments. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Members of the House, as the Speaker of the House, I do report that the bill has passed committee stage without any amendments. So I now ask that the bill be read a third time. And, Madam Clerk? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Temporarily Modify the Representation of the People Act in order to postpone the holding of a general election of members to serve on the respective councils of municipal corporations and a general election of the mayors of city municipalities, read a third time and passed.
Madam Speaker, it is not contemplated for us to do any further business today. I therefore ask that the House adjourns until a date to be fixed.
Members, the question before the House is that we do adjourn for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned. Members, just before you leave, there are two things on the agenda. There's the media engagement at Jamaica House tonight, and I think the member from St. Catherine has a gospel. Oh, it's tomorrow night, the gospel at the Kidston Town All Age. So to celebrate the season of Lent, it would be good for us to reach out to our spiritual needs.